we missed it. Welcome, folks, to Chaps Many Cultures, episode 169. And today we're going to talk about breaking the ice. And we had our guest who we hope will be able to join us. But at this stage, maybe technology has failed us. But in this case, we're still going to go ahead and talk about this idea of breaking the ice on these difficult conversations, especially when it comes to managing differences and confronting differences. So stick around. Well, welcome. And it's because of the delay, we may not even be live on Facebook. So Facebook is kind of off the grid, but we are here on LinkedIn and YouTube.
And on YouTube. And Norwegian greetings to all of you.
Yeah. Wherever you are in the world.
This is Two Chaps Many Cultures, the show about the business of culture and the culture of business. And as Brett said, we had a guest scheduled. We still have a guest scheduled, and we're not quite sure yet how he's going to join us and whether he will make it in time. And we sincerely hope that everything is all right on his end. And due to the delayed start of our live broadcast, Facebook may have kicked us out. And if Facebook did in fact do that, then we apologize. And yet we capture our broadcast live on YouTube and on LinkedIn. So it's not lost, and it will not be lost on you. And there will be ways for you to engage with the contents of this episode one way or the other. How are you doing, Brett?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm doing very fantastic. Got my vaccine today. Thank you very much.
Yeah. That's the second shot you got, right?
No, that was the first one. It's only the first one. I'm the Pfizer vaccine. It is the first shot, but it was just, it was just a wonderful, I mean, personally, it was a good experience, but as I kind of view the operational side of these things, where you've got many of, the great young people of the armed forces administering this, and then behind them, they're kind of getting the crowd in the right place, and then the wonderful people from the medical field, the scientific field of where these vaccines were produced, sitting there administering the vaccines. And it's just a great thing to do, to see humanity in action, right? Responding to something that the community needs, and certainly to get us all back to normal. So just a personal note of gratitude for all those people that serve us in so many wonderful ways, and many of them invisible, and we don't do enough to thank them. So I know it's happening all around the world, but that's what's going on today. So yep, that's it.
I'm not going to say, or I will say it in parentheses, congratulations, and maybe not. I don't know yet. We don't know how this vaccine will save us all. Who knows? And yet I have this feeling that the small talk, the ice-breaking small talk that we are using with ourselves in different settings will have another sentence to initiate the interaction. It used to be stuff like, hey, what do you do? What brings you here? How was your day so far? You can now say, hey, have you been vaccinated? Or do you want to hear about my vaccination story? Right?
That's right. Yeah.
There's a new icebreaker for you right there.
That's right. And speaking of icebreakers, as we mentioned in the intro, of course, we're going to have a good friend, Bjørn Ekelund, that come on and talk about his development of the tool, which he calls the diversity icebreaker. And I've had the good pleasure of being in a workshop with Bjørn on one of his visits to the US. And when we were preparing, I first invited him to come on and talk about the tool itself, which was in and of itself, I think it's a great, one of the other many tools in our armory that we can use. But I think it is it does use the basis of colors and it does use some the responses of questions to the participants to, I guess, loosely group into the tendencies or the personal tendencies or preferred styles in the way that we approach these discussions. Yeah, and it was interesting with now inviting Bjørn on here, and he responded with something that he has observed since actually having to, it's developed in Europe, of course, but it was developed in a certain way with a certain approach, and that approach was through the lens of humor. Knowing Bjørn like I do, and also I know that Piotr Pluta, his colleague, who was also involved in the development, they do have a light-hearted way of approaching life and a light-hearted way of approaching even difficult conversations. What Bjørn has reported back to us is that maybe we could talk about the aspect of some of the pushback he's got over the tool, approach it from a light-hearted viewpoint. And many times here in the US, these are very, very serious conversations that are around current day, current events that are happening right in front of our eyes. And so therefore maybe perhaps a lighthearted approach to it is not appropriate. So, we've talked about humor before and the use of humor, but the way it's deployed, and this is a classic example of that. And I think, and I'm kind of sorry that Bjørn isn't here talking about that, but I guess he was asking us the question. So I'm going to respond in this episode, or we can both respond in this episode to whatever extent we can, as to what do we think about that here in the US? What's our observations around that? So what about you, sir? What do you think in responding to that? What do you think?
Well, let me first clarify, because I'm not as familiar with Bjørn's approach as you are. So how does he break the ice in his Norwegian/European context that may or may not go over well here in the US? Well, what's the baseline for the approach?
Well, from memory, and it's been a while, so I want to just I want to kind of think about the fact that it is, again, it's having people answer a question, a set of questions, putting them in kind of loose groups. Those groups then kind of ascribe a preferred type of interaction style or expectation style of how we show up in the world. And that therefore that kind of takes out the personality part of it and the wrong or right of it. Yeah. And so, I find myself even using other tools in this way, in saying, okay, now that the personal aspect is out, now we can have a bit of fun with this. And it's made me pause in thinking how I do that, right? You can even do it with GlobeSmart. You can do it with all these different tools and say, okay, now who in your kind of network, or who can you have this open conversation with and say, this is why you're like that, right? I could say to Christian, see, now you're German. See, now I've realized you're so direct and you take your humor very seriously. How you respond to it, I have to take that into consideration. So that's kind of where I think it approaches it. It probably does it again. If Bjørn would probably explain it better than that, but I don't know.
As we discussed earlier on one of the early episodes of our program, that humor is a bit of a tricky beast, right? The way we deploy it and the way we apply it is highly contextual, and it may not work outside of our own context, right? I for sure know how my jokes fell flat, or how my approach at being funny was not immediately understood. I vividly remember not too long ago, actually it was yesterday, on the Clubhouse conversation that you and I initiated around cultural appropriation. There was a gentleman from Brazil who's lived in the United States for a long, long time. And I directly approached him with a tongue-in-cheek question that was, it didn't yield the result that I wanted, right? So he immediately went into a defense mode, and others in the Clubhouse room came to his defense and calling me out on my straight shooting direct approach, where my attempt at humorous ice-breaking completely derailed, right? Or that icebreaker ship sank right there in front of my eyes. So I don't know. I'm curious to see how the humorous part of icebreaking could be adjusted to cultures where humor is used in a different way.
Yeah, well, you know, and we've also a couple of weeks ago talked about the difference between intent and impact. Yeah,
right.
And even then, describing that's a non-visual tool or a non-visual platform we're engaging with at that point. So perhaps with the addition of this video kind of or some kind of visual cues in when you're talking to somebody, being able to be aware of the body language or the smile or the slight kind of wink type of attitude towards it people might deliver these is completely missing when it comes to a fully audio platform. I hear, and this is in Clubhouse we're talking about. So Clubhouse is just a purely audio, and I listen to a lot of these conversations through that lens, and I can hear what might normally be not disconstrued, but actually the impact is for that person who's receiving it completely 100% valid. It's they have taken that on, and they've had some kind of, it's triggered some kind of offense in them, and that's valid. That's 100% valid. Whereas the other person's intent was not to do that. So I think that in this case, Bjorn shared with us a little bit of reflection that he had written out, and in terms of his interactions with certain people that have called out the tool, not him personally, but the tool's approach to a very light-hearted interaction. And I guess of all these tools, we always talk about them. We always say these are not necessarily, these are not definitive, right? They are a starting point of a conversation. But even the starting point of the conversation, unless you break that ice, which we're talking about, unless that ice is broken, we can talk about it in real terms. If you are on ice and your intent is to break it to do fishing, what do people do? They do it very strategic. It's a small hole. I've never been ice fishing, by the way, but I'm assuming it's a small hole where you can put your line through and just make it big enough to get the fish back through the hole. Now, what if if someone comes along and says, well, I'm here to ice fish, and they've brought a big hammer with them, and all they're doing is just, smashing the ice in various ways. And we actually have Bjorn here. He's clicked in.
He emailed me while we were talking. Apparently, the link got lost in the shuffle somehow. So without further ado, welcome straight from Oslo, Mr. Bjørn Ekelund. How are you, sir?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I heard some notes that you were breaking some ice.
Yeah, and we broke them, and I think we broke stuff. So we're hoping you can help us fix it.
Well, the name of my concept is not to fix it, at least not the ice, but the communication afterwards is meant at least, yeah.
Yeah.
So we've been talking about, and this is, guys, if you're watching this now, this is live broadcasting without any preparation. So we're really spilling our beans here. This is going hot without any green room prep time. And Bjørn, thank you for making time. It is late or early in the evening where you are. I think it's past 8 p.m. Thank you for taking time to come on our program. Brett and I, we've been breaking the ice with each other a little bit, and I don't know your approach about the diversity icebreaker, whereas Brett does. So I'm curious, how does the original concept of diversity icebreaker work, and how have you found it to be different in its use outside of Norway, outside of Europe?
Okay, but first of all, thank you very much for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be part of the communication that you are sharing with people all over the world. So thank you very much for having the opportunity. The diversity icebreaker, yeah, it's a concept that is based upon an experiential learning process, and I think most people who have been through it, they talk about it in this way. we got in and was told that we should learn about ourselves and the others and how to communicate. And then we were asked to fill in a questionnaire. And in 10 minutes, we got the results. Highest or red, highest or blue, or highest on green.
Mhm.
But we were not told what red, blue, and green really means. We had to do the work ourselves because the facilitator boxed us with one dominant color in one corner, what you call the red corner, and those who had dominant on green in the green corner, and those blue in the third corner. And we were asked to describe ourselves in a positive way, which we, of course, did with lots of joy. And then we were asked to describe the others too, but with some kind of dubious instructions. Not good, not bad, nothing information about that. So we had to decide ourselves whether we should continue writing good things about the others or basically saying how we really thought about the others. And this kind of process creates some kind of in-group, out-group process where people get a bit tense about being politically incorrect, bragging about yourself and saying yes and both about the others.
Mhm.
Quite excited. What will the reaction be when they are showing it off to the others? And when they show it to the others, they realize that the others, they can really take it in. And they can, and shit, they have been doing just the same day too. They have been bragging about themselves and saying, well, something about good and bad about ourselves. And then you realize that you have been put up into a process where you have made a category out of a questionnaire. You have found an in-group experience of joy, and you have shared with other people who have the same kind of experience, basically realizing that categorizing people, making in-group, out-group, positive, negative sentiments, that's part of life. It's part of being a natural human being. And when we ask people, what have you learned from this kind of exercise, they get some kind of reconciliation by the whole kind of idea that social categories are, well, as human being, we cannot avoid doing it. And it has some positive and negative components. And then they start to discuss, well, given that we are putting up such kind of categories, how can we understand how to utilize differences? How can we understand that categories that we ourselves have created has some kind of implication for the way we are seeing each other, seeing ourselves, and working together? And then people starting reflecting upon how language has strong effects for the way people see themselves and others, and how it influences interaction. And then it's starting to get interesting, because then people realize that, well, the language, it's important. And the language has consequences. But at the same time, red, blue, and green categories, they have made themselves, which implies that they get some kind of understanding that they can probably influence what kind of categories they are using, whether they are putting a positive and negative experience around it, and how it has some kind of positive implication for the others if they can acknowledge the others' differences, etc., and appreciate the differences. And that is the reconciliation part, you might say. You reconcile with the others who are different from yourself, knowing that you need them. And the beauty is that they know too, that you know that you need them. And then it's okay to be different.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have created a very unique experience with this kind of exercise that takes about 60 to 90 minutes, given how much time you want to play with the learning process around it. But this is the diversity icebreaker concept.
How did this start for you? I mean, you're based in Norway, I suspect in Oslo or somewhere else in Norway?
Well, my office is in Oslo, but I'm living south of Oslo. And this whole kind of concept that you're talking about here, it evolved out of a communication guidance I did for engineers in 1995, who were not so very good at talking with people who didn't have the same engineering mind.
Right.
So in that kind of process, we co-created with the customers 3 basic strategies for communication, which we named red, blue, and green. And we trained the engineers to do red, blue, and green based upon who they were talking to. And that kind of campaign and process really was a success. And then we had to do research. We made a questionnaire. That's the way psychologists are doing research. And then, since it was just being done by ourselves and it looked like very much like a team role concept, we integrated into team role training. And since it was just made by me and my colleagues, we thought that we invited people to fill in with their understanding of red, blue, and green, because we didn't have scientific background for describing what it was. And in order to make it
today, what is red, blue, and green today? How would you?
Sorry, don't you understand what red, blue, and green is? You know.
Maybe okay, I do, but some people would like some context around it.
Yeah. So yeah, the blue people with the blue preference for communication style, you might say, they are more analytical, detail-oriented, concrete, practical. Those people who love Excel pages and who look down at your desk when they're talking to you. And then you have the red people. They are the social, more emotional, relateness people, looking you in your eye, are eager to have harmony and interaction. The green people, they are those people who have lots of associative ideas, open for change, see the global pictures. Yeah. Okay. And in a way, it looks like ethos, logos, pathos. It looks like thinking, feeling, behavior. It looks like heart, head, and hands. And in management concept, it looks like people orientation, task orientation, and change orientation. And since these kind of 3 components are very generic and easily recognizable as soon as people see it, people who take part in the seminar grasp it very easily. And they also feel that they can master this kind of thing. And they see that the others can master it too. And then it's easy to take them into use, this kind of language. And then they starting to realize that, well, I can say to a green guy, well, I know you are green, but you know, we are at the end of the week, we need to close down now. So please stop talking now. Please stop, come up with new kind of ideas. Focus on the task, my friend. And by saying this kind, which very often is looked upon as being a negative feedback, when you say this kind of thing, you acknowledge that the other is green. And then the green is, oh yeah, I'm green, yeah. But then you also implicit have an idea that the other is willing to listen to you. That's why you are talking to him. And you even ask for flexibility. And then me as a green, I guess both acknowledged for being green. I'm being acknowledged for, oh, well, he thinks that I will listen to him. And of course, I can be flexible. So in one way, there are 3 positive compliments given to a person when you use this kind of language, instead of serving negative feedback around it. So what people say, it seems that this kind of language creates some kind of positive easiness for talking about individual differences in a way that you can collectively co-create a better interaction between people. And what we have been doing now, we have been focusing on what I call the communication style differences. When I talked about the humor, I talked about the reflexivity about language, then we are into the area which is interesting from cross-cultural aspects. Because what is culture? Culture is a group of people who have something in common, who have put a category and use that kind of category to identify the group. Just like what the red, blue, and green people have been doing in the seminar. So there are huge similarities with culture as a concept, with some kind of values, belief systems in the bottom that ends up in some kind of formative behavior that make you distinct from the others. And that kind of metaphorical learning from the diversity icebreaker is the one that is most interesting when you are talking about the cross-cultural area.
Mm.
Realize that.
You shared with us when we were in communication preparing for this, some reflections that you'd had on the experience in applying the actual tool to different cultures, and in particular the US, and that humor aspect that you touch on there, and whether or not it was received in the same spirit or understanding of intention that it was in your experience in Europe. So, I mean, I guess can I just kind of clarify, were you asking our opinion on that? I mean, I read it and I thought, well, because you said, I'm interested in your thoughts on this, but I could see immediately, where, having done the Icebreaker, where some of and we were in a very comfortable, just to kind of think back on when we did it with a bunch of interculturalists, right? And relatively, a lot of us were green. A lot of us were green by their very intention. So the description that you said, these are people that are open for change, they're open for new ideas, they're open for differences and things like that, kind of makes sense, in that setting. But I can see, when there's a much more mixed group of people, even though we try very hard to say this is not a personal measure, it's just basically who you self-group yourself. Does humor actually suit every culture when you're applying a tool like this? So I was interested in that experience. What has kind of made you think of that? Because I know I've seen you here in the US. We've met before. I've gone through your workshop. So you've been here. You've had that experience. Where does that come from?
Yeah, this is really an issue that is difficult, and I think I've been doing wrong, and I think I have to learn from other people with another type of experience. But the short story is that in the first time I used this kind of tool internationally was in Bosnia in 1999, with all three ethnic groups coming out of the war history, and with 10 nationalities representatives in the whole kind of group. And I saw how this kind of exercise created some kind of language and openness with humor. And since then I've been very fond of using the whole kind of tool to create some kind of common ground and openness in very tricky area. And in the US context, when I first presented this kind of diversity icebreaker concept in a conference in Anaheim in Academy of Management, and that inside the diversity and inclusion division, you might say, which belongs to the same kind of intercultural groups that you and I last time we met,
Mm-hmm.
and had roughly 50 people in the audience, and I told about the seminar and how people ended up laughing about themselves, reconciled by the idea, well, how fun it can be that I'm so bragging about myself, but you brag about yourself too. So let's just team up together and sort out what's good and what's bad about what's going on. And when I talked about the fun and the humor, and I looked out in the audience, I didn't see anyone smiling. And normally when I do a speech like that, there will sometimes, well, most often, some people come to me afterwards and ask questions and give comments, etc. All 50 people that left without any kind of comments. And this gave me some kind of indication. There is something I'm doing wrong here. I'm not able to convey the story in a true way. And then, of course, I've been trying out different kind of variety together with US consultants inside the diversity and inclusion area. And we have been changing that kind of questions. Can you describe the others? And instead we have been asking questions like, when you are at your best, how can you create problems for the other? Another way of asking is, how can I create problems for you how do I want you to behave towards me? So we started phrasing this kind in a way that was more instrumental for but where the people themselves, instead of talking about the others and take it for granted that this could be reconciled, they told the others about how they saw how they themselves created problems for others. And that was much more easy to talk about in the US context around it. Then gradually I started to work more with people who worked in the racism issue. And I had a relatively good communication with many of those people of color that belongs to this kind of branch tradition in the US context. And they told me something that I should have realized before. But, you know, sometimes you get blindfolded. Well, at least I got blindfolded. And they said that, Bjørn, you know, this area of racism, the experience we have of racism, is so deeply embedded in our body. So when we start a process where we shall be more open to each other and know each other and learn from each other in a decent, open, authentic way, we need, first of all, to express our history and being acknowledged for that kind of history. We can't start the first hour by red, blue, and green and having fun. That is really disharmony in relation to the need of speaking up, telling the story, and getting acknowledged for that kind of history that really is grounded in this kind of body before they are entering into the process of reflecting upon language, finding how people are different, playing all kind of strengths. Just so, anyway, I'm asking colleagues in the US context, how and when in the process could that kind of concept be relevant? And maybe icebreaker is not the right word. Maybe it is the integrator that is the good word that you could do after the icebreaking. Because the whole kind of concept both diversify and unify at the same time. So in one way, it is a model, an exercise that creates some kind of psychologically safety for being yourself and being expected to be listened to and respected and integrated in a total united community. That is basically what the exercise is about. And given the situation in US today with this polarization issue, as one of my friends from Utah said, Bjørn, I know what your tool can do. I know what this process can create. And it's a pity if this kind of process is not available for US people in today's situation where they really need to be aware that the difficulties of talking with other people is primarily something that you can do by changing your own mind. It's primarily something you can do by changing the way you're approaching others. Right. And at least showing some kind of respect and acknowledgement of the other's kind of perspective. And not just enter and keep yourself into your own community of things just the same. So basically said, I don't know what to do now. I think I have a concept that has a huge potential, not only in racism, but in the whole kind of creating a communication culture in the US context where people get used to talking with people who have a different view of themselves, not as an issue for fighting or being better than, but being able to integrate the other kind of perspective, given the background they have, in a way to create a shared solution around here.
When you described it and when you talked about the origins of the model, my question was on the tip of my tongue. At what point do you feel safe to introduce the idea to the group, right? And you learned that in the US, at least in the context you presented it in North America, you learned that presenting the idea early on in the process may not be as good, right? It may not give you the result that you want because there's a rapport building process, a trust building process, a exchange of common history and acknowledging of it that needs to precede any type of exercise like this. And I was wondering, I don't know a lot about Norwegian society, but I would suspect that whether it be in Oslo or throughout the country or throughout Scandinavia, to use a macro region, there is a higher level of, let's say, homogeneity in society compared to that in North America, right? So you start at a different baseline. Would that be safe to say, Bjørn?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's it's pinpointing one of the main differences. And going back to your first question, how have you experienced this kind of tool being applied in other kind of culture?
Right.
The homogeneity of the Scandinavian society makes diversity curiously interesting.
Right.
But I've tried out, for example, I've been interviewing 12 consultants who have been using the tool in 13 different African countries, and they report about the same kind of stories. Mm-hmm. I've been doing it in the Middle East, research-based with students at the Hebrew University, and the researchers there have been for 6 years experimentally testing this kind of intervention of 60 minutes. And with normally a groups where you have 60% Jewish people brought up in Israel, 20% immigrant with Jewish attributes, and 10% Arabs. These are normally the student groups in the business school at Hebrew University. And every autumn semester, they are running experimental designed seminars with 200 students. I've been doing that for 6 years. And they've been documenting in that kind of context that the intervention itself creates positive affect, trust, creativity, increased relatedness, that creates some kind of atmosphere, which we call climate, psychological safety climate, that make people easier to voice. And this is done by tough social experimental designed seminars repeatedly in 6 years. So in one way, and the tool has been used in 75 countries. And given all this kind of thing, I'm a bit astonished that we have not been able to more successfully going into the US context, since the US people are advanced facilitators, they are good trainers, etc. So my conclusion is that I'm an idiot. You know, there is something that the way I've been approaching the US market that is yeah. Well, as I said, I need help, Brett. There are some elements in this kind what I have in between my hands that doesn't work when it comes out of my mouth.
Well, you know, maybe we can help you, or the thousands of people that are viewing us here in this our global look. But I mean, I guess I'm being facetious. My question is then, is it a US thing, or do you have experience in applying this in Canada, which is a relatively close geographically, but somewhat obviously different culturally? But is there some of this frustration, or if you haven't deployed it a lot in Canada, in terms of a North American context, or is it purely US?
It has been used in business schools and other contexts in the US, and in such kind of context, it works very much the same way. In management training, executive education, schools, etc. So the area where I thought I could contribute into the area of the toughest racism issue, that's the place where it really kicks off, etc. Yeah, it has been used in Canada, of course, but Canada has a total different kind of perspective on multiculturalism, which is, if you talk about large differences between Norway and US, the whole kind of idea of cultural differences between Canada and US, at least by the Canadian, is outspoken very clearly different.
Yeah. Okay.
So no, this is.
I think you're not an idiot. None of us are. So even though I like your approach to self-deprecating humor, and this is probably a very Norwegian thing, Mr. Green, right? I think there is a history in North American teaching and corporate facilitation processes where for, I would say, 2 generations now, the putting people into boxes or into color corners is something a lot of people in the US have a strong reaction against, because it's been a learned behavior to move away from colored corners or boxes and restrictive thinking. Now, I'm not saying your concept is restrictive thinking. It actually triggers us to mutually acknowledge our commonalities within the blue, red, or greens. It's playfully accepting that we come with certain cognitive restrictions, and the playful acceptance then allows us to deal with the next steps with more humor than before. I think I understand the psychological approach to this. And on the flip side, my assumption or my experience of working with people in the United States is that a lot of them have this initial pushback. Oh, Bjørn, you're not going to put me in a corner and you're not going to put a color on it. I'm not sure I like this. And that ends the thought process, right? Even though it might be beneficial to the group to think along and just get over that hump, but just getting over that hump is not as easy for some. And as you rightfully explained, especially in a anti-discrimination, anti-racism setting, diversity, inclusion, equity, we're dealing with overcoming obstacles that have accumulated over 400 years. And now we have people standing on each side of the obstacle, still trying to figure out how to get through or over it or around it. And I agree, that is a almost insurmountable challenge. And I say almost because I truly believe that it can be done. The answer, I don't know if we all have it yet. I think any tool, including yours, will play a part in overcoming these obstacles.
I think you are very precise describing you might say, the history of not using categories as an important pedagogical, you might say, attitude, because you think that this is too simplistic, etc. But and when I realized what you said, I was a bit stubborn too, saying that, well, if you shall do experiential learning with humor, you have first to start with something. Yes. So you start in this kind of process, you start by not telling them really what's going on, but letting them behaviorally go in a corner and emotionally being stirred up, and intellectually afterwards trying to learn about themselves and the others through reflexivity around. And the humor helps to that reflexivity for people who can laugh of themselves, that illustrate that they can see themselves from an outside point of view. And it's much more easy to speak to a person that you know can see himself from an outside point of view. He's not only grounded in his body by all his emotional reactions, he's able to laugh of himself. So the reconciliation aspect of humor at collective level has an extremely huge potential. But you cannot create humor by telling first that you shouldn't put people into boxes. You can't use this kind of thing. So starting seminars by putting up your fingers for saying no, you can't do such kind of thing, which is natural for people. That has been part of my stubbornness. That's why I have thought that, let me try again. It must be, I can do something better, instead of finding another way of working around it. But yes, I'm a bit stuck. There are some people who are using the tool successfully in the US context, of course, and there are about 2,000 seminars all around the world every year, and 95 to 98% of the seminars is extremely positively received as an experiential learning exercise collectively around it. Yeah, so I'm still standing on this and stepping and wondering how can I approach the US context. And it might be that it's better to the traditional way of using the tech test, the diversity icebreaker, is in team development, organization development, learning process, management, schools, not basically into the tough racism area. So
well, I'm gonna be. This is my German attempt at being humorous. Your Norwegian stubbornness may simply need more patience and time, because, as we know, it was people from Norway and other parts of Scandinavia who were the first Europeans to arrive in North America, and they kept coming back very stubbornly until they finally settled in what is now the Upper Midwest, right? So maybe you just gotta keep coming. You want to be more stubborn.
And of course, you've got to keep coming, Bjorn. Every time you've been here, it's been a joy. Everybody that you know, when you've bought this tool and you've presented at the different conferences that we've been to, and we've met in person because of that, it's always been a joy to have you as our guest. So yeah, be stubborn. And and of course, just getting back to what Christian identified in that self-deprecation thing, I come from a culture that has a very deep sense of self-deprecation. It's what we kind of exist on. And I think that that's hard here in the US. You know, I get literally called out for it by my US colleagues and friends, you know, and say, you know, why do you keep doing that? You know, it's, well, you know, it's just what I am. It's how I am. It's baked into my psyche. I am who I am, and I can't change it even after 20 years. So keep, but it's, you know, I'm thinking it's so disarming and it's so charming that, you know, people will get it. But oftentimes here in the US context, they don't. They just say, no, you've got to cheer yourself. You've got to be, you know, you've got to be your own best advocate. So maybe some of it lies in that. I don't know. But at least we can, next time you're here and we're traveling, we can sit down and enjoy a cocktail and ruminate over it some more.
I would love to. And I have to say, Christian, when I visited Fargo,
yes,
a few years ago, I also found some Germans there. There was not only, so there were Germans, Swedes, and Danes.
So you did visit Fargo. I congratulate you. I lived for a year, just half an hour, 40 minutes east of Fargo, and that's where you probably they told you this, where they make fun of each other, the Swedish immigrants and the Norwegian immigrants, who keep picking fun at each other in a very self-deprecating way. And I hope you were not offended when you found all the Norwegian souvenirs in the gift shops that were making fun of the Norwegians, right? Yes, yes.
No.
I had nothing to do with that, by the way.
I realized that there was some place in the US that were humor.
Yes, right. Yes, true. And how do people find out about your diversity icebreaker or ice melter or ice, I don't know, ice tripper? Since we're creating new brand names for it, what's the best way for people to find out about it?
Well, you can just Google diversity icebreaker or Google my name, and there is a homepage where it's easy to read relatively lot. But I published a book in London and New York in 2019, which is the best description of the history from 1995 and onwards, where I present how the concept can be applied for interpersonal differences, interdisciplinary differences, and cross-cultural differences. So I look at these three, you might say, deep-level diversity categorical system: personality, red, blue, and green, interdisciplinarity, paradigm, and cultural dimensions around it. And I describe how I think is the best practice in order to use these kind of diversities for efficiency and innovation and creating commitment collectively. And so if you just Google my name, and it probably will come up in the Amazon and all these kind of electronic, digital.
What do people do who have no idea how to write the O with the slash through it? How do they type it? I mean, I know how to do it, but those who don't, how do they find it properly?
Well, the English language has overruled the Norwegian characters. So if you just let it be with an O, it works in all kind of electronic system all around the world, etc. So yeah, we were not able to rule the world there in our own characters.
You tried very hard. So I'm being facetious here, but the letter with the O with that diagonal line through it,
yeah.
I think it's only existent in Norwegian and Danish, right? Or any other languages of that?
No, I don't think so.
And how do you call it? What's the name for that letter? Yeah, like the Ö in my name, like the Swedish, German, Turkish Ö, right? Or But do you have a Norwegian name for the sliced letter? No, okay.
We use the same as Ö, and the German Ö with 2 dots is the same as the Swedish Ö with 2 dots, which is, and the Swedish and the Danish and Norwegian language is basically the same, but the Danes and the Norwegian are closest on the way they're using the characters.
And it's a sound that the English language doesn't produce, which makes for eternal ice-breaking possibilities for me. When people ask me, how do you say your name? And I said, well, you just say it how you spell it. Höferle. It isn't that hard, is it? And from that, we have at least 15 minutes of interaction that will work towards building commonality.
My Australian Siri announces Christian as horrible, which is close to horrible, and I'm going, no, he's not that bad. He's really not that bad.
Or as the school administration in high school that I attended in Minnesota, they pronounced my name hopefully, and I was like, okay. At least we all know who we're talking about. It's all right. And
no, you actually went okie dokie.
Okie dokie. Yeah, you betcha.
Yes, you betcha.
Yeah. And I deliberately did not change the spelling of our last name, because even if I chose an anglicized version of my last name, people will still ask me, how do I spell it or how do I say it? So I might as well use that letter and confuse the heck out of people.
Absolutely.
But playing with words, etc. Of course, diversity is a concept that is linked very often to recruitment, fairness and recruitment. And diversity icebreaking is not about that. Icebreaking, we have agreed, it doesn't work in the racism area at least. So the whole kind of name is absolutely wrong. So a few years ago, I tried to rename it in the US context called trialogue, which is a word that no one...
I remember that. Yeah, I remember the trialogue, yes. Yeah.
Which is a very, very interesting way of phrasing it, because dialogue, everybody knows what dialogue is, but trialogue is 3 units talking together. And having 3 units talking together is much more creative, explorative, while the 2 people talking together easily get into dialectical dilemmas. So the possibility of having a more advanced, playful perspective integration is easier with 3 units into a dynamic system around it. And especially the possibility of using the model we call a reflecting team in family therapy in Scandinavia, which is a model where 2 units are talking together, where the third is observing and commenting on the interaction. Which is an extremely, you might say, mind-opening process, because suddenly there are some people seeing what's going on in between the 2 of us. They don't see only me or the other, but they look upon the interaction. And to have a third part standing outside, observing the interaction and commenting the interaction in a way that the interaction cannot continue in a stuck way, is one of the main ideas with the reflecting team. And I was taking part in development of that kind of model back in 1984, 85, 86. And inspired by that kind of history, I defined let's try to call it trialogue. But no one understands trialogue either, so I was an idiot there too.
Well, I like it.
I actually liked it. I remember thinking that's brilliant, but maybe, I don't know, that's just different perceptions. So that's another approach, and I've just seen that approach being described in initiatives to bridge the blue and red divide here in this country. And one particular speaker came to an event I was at, and he talked about this approach of putting those two people in chairs facing each other, surrounded by a circle of people who are not there to comment and take sides. They were there to simply observe the interaction.
Yeah.
So it exists in other sessions, and they said that all these people got a hell of a lot out of it, and it was a great process in being able to sit on the outside and observe not only somebody you might agree with, but somebody you disagree with, and then see that, hang on, these are two, you know, I can, you know, then it was quite an insightful exercise.
Yeah. It is absolutely. I also had back in 2016, I was traveling to San Francisco and interviewing people who work with serious urban conflicts. And one of those persons I interviewed said that, you know, we were trained in the US National Conflict Management Training course for public work to never, ever suggest two solutions, always three. And then we started to explore that kind of quality. And as you said, when you are putting forward three perspectives, it's more easy to find elements in each of them and combine them into a united, integrated thing. But if you have only two suggestions, you get into the situation of either or wrong or right, or well, do I agree with you or not?
Yeah.
So, and anybody who's tried to sit on a two-legged stool will tell you that doesn't work.
At least
and the three-legged stool is best. Absolutely, in all settings, it is all best.
Excellent. I'm glad this worked out, Bjørn. I'm glad you were able to join us, and apologies if we didn't give clear technical instructions on how to make this work. But you're here, you made it. Yeah. I know it's getting late over there in Europe. Thank you very much for joining us. I know you had a full day today. You told us you had a lot of stuff going on today, and even though after you're done with work, you're still spending time with us. So I really appreciate that, Bjørn.
Thank you.
I enjoyed the conversation perhaps more than you. It was fun.
Well, I'm just glad to be. Absolutely. Oh, that's great. And you look like I was thinking as Bjørn has showed up in his spa. This looks beautiful. You've got this beautiful timber spa you've got behind you, but that looks a great background you've got there. It's fantastic.
Well, it is my local office in my city on the coast of Norway, where the Riviera is waiting for beach activity.
Oh, nice.
Terrible place to be.
It is.
Well, thank you again.
Yeah, we say
thank you very much. Thank you very much.
We say tak and I hope I say it right. Hadet, right? Or is that, how do I say goodbye? Hadet?
No, it's not. You don't say hadet.
No, how would I say goodbye?
Had.
I mispronounced it, right? See, there we go.
It's the right wording, you know. But as you said to the English people, don't say it the way it is. But it's hard.
Hard. Did I say it right?
Okay. Hard.
Good.
Thank you very much.
And another episode of Two Chaps, Many Cultures. We will see all of you back in the studio tomorrow with more interesting guests, as you will find out. Ciao for now.
See you guys. Bye.